You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Cruikshank. Our podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts, Rachel Land and Katya Barch, as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness. The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.
So I've definitely had students injured in classes when I've been teaching. Nothing that I know of recently, but when I taught power vinyasa and there was that higher cadence and the room was heated. And I think sometimes that can be a huge help for people because it makes you feel more supple. But for people like me who are on the more supple side already, it means I don't get my early warning signals and I can go too far.
Yeah.
So I've seen a couple of people injured in there, one of whom came in already feeling a little niggle, and I advised her to be gentle, and it still went the way that we were hoping it wouldn't. And one was just out of the blue. She was doing a pose where it wouldn't even occur to me that her sacroiliac joint would be at any kind of load there. And she experienced pain and had to leave the class. So I've had a couple. One, I feel like I probably could have done more. The other, just out of the blue, it was like me moving my legs in bed. That wasn't even something I was thinking of as a possibility, and neither was she. So there's always the chance. And there's no way you can completely bubble wrap students and protect them from all potential injury. And nor would you want to, because I think that also sets up this teacher-student hierarchy that I feel is unpleasant.
And fragility.
Yes.
Right? This feeling of being fragile. I think what's so important too, as we back up from the physical and mechanical realm, is just to also remember that each person has their own journey. And as much as I struggled with my herniated disc, which was my biggest injury by far, and other things I've had here and there, they've also been really important learning experiences. And as a teacher or a student, like, you never know, like, this is their path. And, whether they listen to you or not is their choice, right? Whether they take that route or another route, whether, it's all our own journey. And as a teacher, all I can do is do my best, offer what I can, be of service, and remember that there's a whole lot more to it. That's a lot of context that I don't know. And, a journey that is out of my hands too, potentially. So I always like to keep that in mind.
It sets us free, doesn't it? It's all help, but not responsible, because at the end of the day, we're all adults and we're all making decisions based on what we feel like we need in the moment.
Yeah. And
quick question for you. Oh, sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say, I think you're going to say the same thing. It brings us to this idea of, like, do you ask for injuries?
That's exactly where I was heading. And I used to diligently before every class, does anyone have any injuries that they'd like me to be aware of? And then we went one step more sensitive with it. We would do it when nobody else was looking, like you're in child's pose, raise your hand if there's something that you want me to know about. And now I don't ask at all.
Yeah. I'm the same. I think one of the issues for me with asking about injuries is that it then starts to shift the responsibility to me. And even if I know they have a hamstring injury or a back injury, I don't know where they're at in that process. I don't know what's painful, what they can or can't do. And so it gives them, I mean, maybe for some people it feels nice. I know some people enjoy teachers asking that because they feel cared for, which is wonderful, I think. But it can also have this effect of now putting that on me when I can't possibly know and account for, especially if there's a lot of people in the room and a lot of different injuries going on, all of these things. And so while I love the idea of asking, and if someone comes up to me before class or after class and asks me some questions about something that's going on, I may or may not be able to give them very specific stuff without doing a full evaluation and spending more time with them. But, I can give them some quick little tips, and that's great. But at the beginning of class, I don't know. To each his own. I think it's great if you like doing that and it's helpful for you as a teacher, and especially in smaller classes, it can be nice to take requests or things, but I think it's hard when you have a class and maybe one or two speak up and it's not what everyone else is feeling,
Yeah.
it's you have to kind of teach to the whole room, not just to one
Mm.
or two people.
And the other thing I think that comes up is I might not have an injury. Maybe I haven't sprained my ankle or fallen, but my wrist feels weird today. Sometimes we just wake up with stuff.
Yeah.
And some students don't identify that as something that they need to talk about. So I feel like asking, do you have a specific injury that you can attach to an incident that has a diagnosis, almost limits people from that process of just, how am I feeling today? And does this feel helpful or unhelpful? Do I want to do more of that? Am I going to leave that out? And I would prefer everyone to be in that much more inquisitive space of, regardless of whether they have a specific injury or not, just, how am I feeling? Is this helping? Do I need to back off? Do I need to lean into it? You know,
Mm.
that's that's for me the most interesting place to see people practice.
Teaching them the owner's manual to their body,
Mhm.
which is constantly being rewritten.
Mhm.
Constantly being rewritten. The pages are changing. And I think this is why I love yoga. And I really believe it is the foundation of our health and wellness, is because it's allowing us to collect more information. It's allowing
Mm.
us to really get this sense of body awareness, body awareness, mind awareness, the whole three-dimensional awareness of body, mind, spirit, and also being able to then navigate all of these things, to notice what's helping, whether that's yoga or something else. And so, yeah, I prefer not to ask. And
Mm.
then, I think the other question that tends to come up a lot are there poses or transitions you don't teach?
Yeah, good
And
question. Are there for
I
you?
I have one in particular that comes to mind a lot. And my history is the back injury, so it does relate to backs. And I think it's by far the most common injury you see. It's most of the time the reason why people go to see the doctor, and the majority of the reasons why, or the most common reason why people go to see a healthcare specialist. Um, and so I just assume that in any given class that there's at least a few people, if not a handful or a bunch, that have back issues.
Mhm.
Now, that might be very mild, that might be more severe. So anyways, one I don't teach, and it's not because it's inherently wrong or bad, but it's just with that in mind, is a bird of paradise. And where
Oh.
you where you start in Uttanasana, so you're in a
Mhm.
forward fold and you bind the leg, and then you're carrying the weight of that leg and your torso up to a standing position. And so those who have taken our spine course know that, as we start to hinge forward, there's different degrees of pressure on the intervertebral discs. And that would be the highest on all of the scales right there anytime I'm lifting
Yeah,
weight like that. So for disc issues, it's a really big thing. I can do it fine now. And again, I think the
yeah.
the appropriate challenge for the individual. I'm not saying that Bird of Paradise is inherently wrong or bad, but in a group class, you can guarantee there's someone with a back issue,
Mm.
maybe even a disc issue.
Mm.
And it's just, for me, it's not worth it. Like, what does Bird of Paradise give me as a teacher that I can't replace with some other pose?
Oh, come on. An amazing photograph for Instagram. I must have some of me doing Bird of Paradise on Instagram somewhere. I hadn't even thought of that one. I haven't taught it in years and years, but I also mostly now teach older students. And if I have some listening that are, in their 40s, I don't mean you, I mean people that are older. And so there are plenty of poses that they're not in my head on a list of things that I don't teach, but they're just not in my regular repertoire. So I haven't taught
Yeah.
that in a million years. I don't teach headstand or shoulder stand, haven't in probably 10 years. Not because they're on a list of things that thou shalt not teach, but just because they're not going to be helpful for the bulk of the people that I'm teaching. And plenty of people know in my classes, if they have an option that they like to take, they're welcome to take it. I'm not going to rush over and make them stop. Have fun, have at it. But I'm offering
Yeah.
what I think will be helpful for the majority of students. And yeah.
I I'm the same with shoulder stand and headstand, though I personally love both of them.
Mm,
Shoulder stand, again, there's just so many people with neck issues, and it just takes a while to actually stop and break down the pose if I want everyone to do it. So if I'm usually just offering it for people who love it and know how to do it. Same thing with
mm,
headstand drives me crazy because um it I can't stand watching people try and jump into it or do it against the wall, because I have this great
yeah.
pressure. Think about this loading, right? The loading is a good thing. All of these are good things. But in headstand, I have all of this weight now. I mean, ideally, most of it's in my arms, but there is a little bit on the head. There's meant to be some
Mm.
on the head and then in the discs and the spine, which is a good, healthy loading. But imagine now if I tip that back into a wall, or I'm flinging my weight up and like hoping I'm going to catch it, balancing on my
Mm.
neck. It's so scary to me as a teacher to watch.
Yeah, this is
But
actually one instance where
I don't
years
teach it.
ago I was practicing in a class and the teacher was way over the opposite corner of the room and the student next to me was trying to bounce up into a headstand. And I haven't done this since. I don't know if I do the same thing now, but at the time I was in my must keep all students safe phase. And I broke out of student character and said to him, come down, don't do that. I'll talk to you after class. I know, which is, it's kind
Rachel,
of, I know, it's
sometimes
kind
you
of
have to be
rude.
firm.
Well,
Sometimes
I
you
don't
have to
know
be
if that was the
firm.
right, yeah, I don't know if that was the right occasion. Like I said, I don't know if I would do it now, but at the time, I was just looking at his neck and going, that's no,
We
I
all
couldn't.
change
Yeah.
as teachers, our ways. And, I remember a long time ago, um, mid 90s, I think it was, and I was teaching headstand, which I didn't teach that often or practice that often then. But I remember saying very clearly to turn around, and at the time I was asking people to do it with a wall behind them, not to use the wall, but that it was behind them. And a man,
Mm.
and at the time I thought he was older because I was um
16.
20 or something,
He
18,
was
something
probably
like that.
35 and you were like,
I
old
was in
man, come
I
down.
was in college, and he was probably in his 60s, but I was on the other side of the room helping someone else, and he clearly didn't listen, turned away from the wall, kicked up in the headstand, was up there for a brief second with a really nice line, and then like a tower just went straight over and landed flat on his back. And I
Mm.
was beside myself. I was horrified. And he
Yeah.
just got right back up and was, according to him at the time, was fine. But
Yeah.
oh my God, it was probably one of the most
Yeah.
horrifying experiences I've had.
I guess this is the one that comes to mind for me because I see, there are plenty of indigenous societies where people walk around carrying loads on their head
Yeah.
every day. And I imagine their neck and my neck
Yep.
are totally different creatures because I spend hours of every day with my chin jutting forward as I'm working on a computer. So headstand for them, even if they were only using their head and not their hands, would be a completely different thing than it would be for me. So we can train our bodies to do pretty much anything.
Yeah,
But when we're teaching a group class, looking around the room, there's a good chance our students haven't been training their necks to carry their body weight.
exactly. And
Mm.
I'd say one more I don't usually teach anymore are the jump forwards and jump throughs. And again,
Mm.
that's kind of a personal thing. One, because I think it demands a lot of hamstring flexibility. And it also kind of depends on your bony proportions. I have very long legs. And so it also puts a lot more demands then on my lower back to lever that weight up and
Mm.
forward. And I found for me when I was going through all my back stuff that that was such an important thing to take out, because it puts so much effort on my lower back, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing, in the right place in the right time. And for some people, their body proportions make those really easy. For me,
Mm.
it was a lot more. I mean, I could do them. I don't do them anymore, really. I mean, I jump forward sometimes. That's fine. But but if you're doing that 50 times
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
sequence,
And I guess
it's
that's the other
what
thing
it
that
is.
we should probably talk about is one off versus a million times. Because I think Chaturanga often comes up for people. I've posted about it before, and people will jump into the comments and say, oh, I call this the shoulder shredder. I would never teach Chaturanga, that sort of stuff. And I think, once, twice, it's fine. 50 times in every class every day, maybe it's not fine. So the dose is so important.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's it for me. It's not that I don't like jumping forward or jumping through or like you should never teach them or they're inherently bad or wrong because I think there's something interesting and valuable in all of these things. The hard thing is the context and
Mm.
the frequency and duration and like and then you step out of the yoga world and you go in the fitness realm and you're like why wouldn't I do
Wow.
chaturanga? Chaturanga is just another form of a push-up. Like, why are you
Yeah.
only doing 10? Why aren't you doing a lot more? You need to do several sets of that. It's like
That's so
we are
true.
we are kind of when then we start to overthink it. So, I
Mm.
think it's just important. The chaturanga one is an interesting one though, because a lot of people love vinyasa and they jump right
Mm.
into this more active form of vinyasa. And if I've never done that style of push-up, the tricep chaturanga push-ups, which are a lot harder than traditional push-ups because my pecs get more
Mhm.
involved. If I've never done that before and I just start doing a ton of them, of course it's going to shred your jaw. I mean, not it's not a given. I hate saying that. I'm really trying not to use language around in that way anymore. But I mean, you gotta work up to that, like everything you would
Yeah.
do in life.
You've got to
You
train
don't
for
just
it.
decide you want to be an Olympic gymnast one day.
Well, no, no, it's true. And I guess too that sort of circles back to the division between acute and chronic. Like when I'm teaching a group class, I'm always aware of trying to minimize opportunities for acute injuries. I don't want people to fall over. I don't want somebody to fall out of headstand because that could be just a split second thing that goes badly. But things that are more cumulative, like hamstring loading or shoulder loading in chaturanga, for me, I think more about the dose. How often am I teaching that? How often am I teaching that versus other challenges for that part of the body? Is there an overall sense of balance in the way that I teach to that joint or that part of the body? Am I kind of training people to build up, or am I doing, well, I have done this before, 108 sun salutations for people who've rarely done
Mhm.
yoga before. So, you know, thinking about the acute versus chronic, I think is also really important to do in that kind of context.
And I think remember too, we have to keep bringing the perspective back. Like we're talking primarily about the physical element
Mm,
of asanas. And remember, there's we all know. I mean, I think anyone who's listening to this who's practiced a bit, there's so much more to it. And just for the sake of being able to go deep into a topic, we are really focusing on the physical, but there are many other important benefits that we can't lose sight of. Sometimes we get so focused on the alignment or the risk or the injuries or the
mm.
that we lose sight of the importance, which I know you and I both appreciate sometimes, is just practicing and not thinking about it and breathing and like we used to back
Mm.
in the 90s. We just show up and explore the poses and feel them and breathe and it was
And I
different,
think
but
talking about the other limbs of yoga makes me think too that you can't do any yoga practice, including pranayama, including meditation, and assume that they're risk free. Any
mm,
powerful practice can have positive, but also has the potential for negative outcomes. There are some pranayama practices that we don't teach to certain populations or people in a certain phase of life. There's meditation techniques that I wouldn't offer to every person, depending on the state of their mental health. So
mhm,
every powerful practice needs to be treated with respect. And this was something that you said when we were talking about this that really struck home for me. The potency of yoga practice is what draws us, its capacity to support us and heal us and change us. But that power, with great power comes great responsibility. I'm watching all the Marvel movies again at the moment, so I had to put that in, even though you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. Spider-Man, for those who are listening. With any really powerful practice, you've got to treat it with respect. And that goes for physical asana practice, but the other limbs of yoga too.
I think with any potent medicine, you need the proper
Yes.
dosage. I
Yes.
mean, it's that simple. And,
Mhm.
there's so many forms of it in yoga. All right,
Mm.
let's get into some things. I mean, I think we've already talked about some of these, but what are some of the things that people can do to reduce the likelihood of injury? Remember, this is reduced. There's no way to 100% prevent injury. I really try and steer away from that word. It's sometimes hard not to use it a little bit, but
Yeah.
we're trying to minimize it. We're human though. Our bodies are changing, and just like they can change and become injured, they can also change and become resilient and healthy. And so what can we do to reduce what are some of the things that we could do to reduce the likelihood of injury potentially?
For me, the most important thing as a student is that we take charge of our own practice. I mean, your teacher's there for a reason. They have some experience and some expertise to share, but you're the only one who knows how you're feeling in your body. And so for me, the single most important thing we can do in our practice is to pay attention and act accordingly. How do I feel? What's going on for me? Does that feel better or worse? Is that helping or not helping? Rather than just going through the motions in our practice.
I love that you started with that one too, because that's at the top of my list too, is
Hmm.
be accountable and embody your practice. And as a teacher is, planting these seeds to get your students to be accountable. All those
Mm,
little things that you get them to actually listen and notice and pay attention to how you feel. And, all those little cues that we drop are so important. Uh,
mm.
and the options, right, for them to choose from. That accountability is such a big, big part of it. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest one because if we all take that individual responsibility and we all pay attention, then the likelihood of us getting ourselves into a situation that is damaging is so much less. Um, the other thing I think that comes up a lot is people thinking that there's correct form and incorrect form. And I even see this to this day, people saying, you can only get injured if you're doing it wrong. I'm adding I'm adding air quotes for those of you who are listening. And if you're doing it right, air quotes, then there's no possible way that you can get injured. And I wish that were true. That would be really easy. But from what we know now about people's bony variations, about the differences in their muscles and joints and attachment points, and the difference in the way that we load and use our bodies in daily life, there's no one perfect way to practice any pose. And even though as teachers we're giving instructions that will suit the majority of people, it's never going to be perfect for everyone. So if you're practicing with correct form and the pose still doesn't feel right, or it's still causing you pain or exacerbating your injury, it's not the right alignment for you. And to me, that goes back to the first one of take charge and be autonomous in your practice.
I love that. I was just teaching a live class and I was hanging around for some questions afterwards, and this came up. And the woman had studied a bunch of different styles of yoga, and she kind of mentioned something along the same lines. She used that terminology, I think, the right alignment. And I was like, okay, well, well, hold on here, because what is the right alignment? It was, I mean, she didn't necessarily mean it that way. Um, because I think she was kind of jiving on the same, track of thought that I was. But, it is easy to think that there is a right alignment. We have an obsession with
Mm,
angles and lines and pictures. And rightfully so, it's our human nature. We just want to know how we're supposed to do it. Whether we
yeah.
call that the right way or the wrong way, or
Yeah.
the 90-degree angle or what. But we have this obsession. It's just a lot easier to be, in that right or wrong
Hmm.
mentality. But when we live in this gray area of listening to the body and feeling into it, and also remembering that our body is designed to move in every direction, that
Hmm.
these angles that we've chosen oftentimes in a yoga practice, like warrior pose and the knee being over the ankle, are simply usually just the safer versions to start with. It's
Hmm.
not that we can't ever bring our ankle out over our knee, because we sure as heck do during our day. I don't pay attention to that when I'm moving around. I don't think you do,
If I
but
have a knee injury, then I do. And to
if
me, that can be helpful of the right load at the right time. Yeah.
exactly, but if you have a knee injury, that might feel a little, you might feel different about that.
Yeah. More
And
load.
so, we start with that in a yoga, 200-hour training or something, these kind of right ways to do things. But then we realize that there are so many different ways to do something like triangle pose that might have
Mm,
different goals to them, that might
mm,
have different reasons behind them. And so, or, maybe my body is just shaped differently. My bones are shaped differently. So my
mm.
pose looks different. So,
This is where what teaching one on one is so much easier than teaching in a group, because one on one, you can have all these really detailed conversations. Oh, it doesn't feel right when you do that. What happens if you? How does it feel if you? You can do all of that exploration. But when we're teaching a group, we kind of have to give an instruction that's going to be helpful for the majority,
yeah.
encourage experimentation in different areas on different days, depending on the focus for our class. But we've got to start somewhere.
Which is great in a group class where ideally we have people who are, fairly healthy. We all have little niggles here and there, but like who are fairly healthy versus people who are working with an injury really do belong working one on one, or at least getting some guidance one on one to go to the group classes. And so in a
Mm,
group class, there's more area to explore and
mm,
experiment and find what feels right to you and be your own best teacher versus, the times when I really need some specific guidance and help, which is still often suggestions. The teacher is experimenting too to see what's most helpful, but that there's an important place for both of those. And I think that's an important one to keep in mind too on this list of, you know, reducing the likelihood of injury is also making sure that when you have an injury, you take it to completion. You really follow that whole cycle of loading it until it is really resilient, which might take
mm.
a while. So,
And you can often do that in your yoga practice. Maybe to begin with, there are certain shapes or positions that you're leaving out. But as you get into that proliferation and remodeling phase, you're coming into 10%, 20%, 30% before you go in as far as you might normally. So it doesn't always mean that you have to sit out your practice, but that daily kind of homework is the important foundational part that allows you to play in other aspects of your life, I think.
yeah. I always loved it when I used to teach. I know you guys teach the 200-hour trainings now, but when I used to teach with them, one of the things I loved most was when I would practice with the students and also listen to my own practice. So there would be things that I would skip, and I loved that because I loved people seeing that. They just assumed
Mm,
that because I could do everything, well, not everything, but because I could do certain things, I would. Or maybe, noticing that just because I'm not doing something doesn't necessarily always mean I can't, or doesn't always necessarily mean that I should be doing that thing,
mm,
but that there is also this wisdom in the listening and knowing that it's not, the wisdom isn't in the teacher telling me. Obviously, I hope they probably have a lot of wisdom of their own, but the wisdom is in me being able to, now we go back to the philosophy, being able to kind of take away the ego and the distractions to be able to be truthful with myself and what I need and nonviolent and content and all of the things so that
mm.
I can um, really get the most out of it therapeutically. I mean, this is what we love at yoga medicine, right? Is practices that help us feel better, to feel our best. Because who cares if you can put your head foot behind your head if you feel awful? And
Yeah.
I know,
Well, honestly,
yeah,
from my perspective, who cares regardless? I don't care if you
I
feel
don't
good,
care. I
really.
well, you care if you feel good. You don't care if you can put your foot behind your head. I mean, I know
Well,
for me, that was like one of the biggest things I had to do to heal my SI joints a long time ago was stopping doing
oh,
that and
I was
building
like,
strength.
wow, therapeutically. Yeah. No,
So,
for me, I'm practicing for the rest of my life. What I do on the mat isn't the goal, it's the means to
yeah.
feeling good in the rest of my life and balancing out the other stuff that I'm doing. So, from my perspective, I don't care what I can or can't do on the mat. What I care about is the other however
Yes.
many hours of the
I
day.
see what you're
That's
saying.
what
I thought you were
matters.
saying the other thing. So, I think a few of the things are mindful attention. Mindful attention is such a big, big part of it. We've talked about it a lot. It's so easy to
Mm,
gloss over, but that mindful attention to notice not just how your body feels, but how the breath responds.
mhm.
Um, Letting go of ego and competition is a really big one. Being able to just be on my mat. I know you had a few others, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking of these from the perspective of teachers, but I think these really apply for students as well. So I did a course. I created a little online course for yoga medicine about common yoga injuries. And I kind of finished up with some general guidelines for what teachers might think about when crafting their classes and teaching their classes. And the first one I think that's really helpful that you can't control as an individual, but the studio or the teacher can, is to be clear in class descriptions. So people know, is this class for everyone? Come as you are. There'll be people sitting in chairs, there'll be people sitting on the floor, there'll be people standing, there'll be people holding onto the wall. Or is this a class that requires a certain level of physical aptitude or physical fitness or resilience? So be clear in your class descriptions about who it's for and what's expected of them.
And that's
But then
one
after,
thing that I feel really strongly about on our YMO platform too. That's why we go to great length to really
yes.
give you lots of details on there and outcome oriented titles so that you can find what you want. Sorry, keep going.
Mm. No, I 100% agree. And as a teacher, I've really enjoyed that. It's been very freeing to be like, I don't have to worry about this population teaching this class. I don't have to worry about whether there's somebody 7 months pregnant doing this class. I'm clear about what the class is, and you can pick or choose whether it suits you. And I also think online, there's a little bit less peer pressure because presumably you're in your home by yourself and there's a little bit less pressure on you to keep up
Mm,
or to do everything. We should feel exactly the same way practicing in
it's
person,
true.
but I don't know that we do.
It's true. And then the downside is, sometimes you do need to push yourself. I hear that from people like, oh,
Oh,
I
for
just come out
sure.
of things.
And it goes back to that two kinds of people with
Balance.
injuries, the people who
Yeah.
load too soon and the people who don't load enough. And it's the same with practice. Some of us push ourselves too much, some of us don't push ourselves enough.
There's
So,
so many pros and cons, I think, to online. Nothing replaces the beauty of having a community to practice with in person, but
mm,
there are so many benefits to practicing online. And it can be so useful, I think, to be able to find what you need and yeah, and grab it. So
yeah,
yeah,
more fine tuned. So, good class descriptions. And I always suggest that when we're teaching classes, we start by creating that little bit of space for students to pay attention. How's your breath? What's going on in your body? What's going on in your mind? So that they're set up to make good decisions as the practice progresses.
I love that. When I teach in person, I always start with people on their back, hands on their
Yeah.
belly.
And I
People
usually
are
do
still coming
too.
in. They're just listening to their breath. Yeah, usually. Yeah.
And in online classes, that's not always the case because if I've got 15 minutes, then I'm assuming people want to get
Yeah.
straight into doing something.
Boom.
But
We're in.
if I'm practicing myself, I might set up that time beforehand. As teachers, I think we can foster a really non competitive environment so we can use props and variations or modifications depending on what language you use. We can use them ourselves, we can demonstrate with them. And my favorite thing not to say full expression of the pose. Every expression is a full expression of the pose. So
Yeah.
for me, offering non-hierarchical options, if you want more of this, try this option. If you want to go a little bit this way, try this option. If you want less in the back foot, if you want more in the back leg. So
Choose
giving
your
people
adventure.
options. Exactly.
I love
So
this.
one's not better, but it's about fine tuning what you need. As teachers, I think we can also anticipate areas of discomfort and offer options or kind of anticipate where people might run into challenges. In any given class, there are probably going to be a couple of people experiencing back pain. There might be a couple experiencing wrist or knee pain. So just anticipating where that might come up, giving people options that mean that they don't feel that they've been left out or left behind. And one that I think that's really important that applies for us when we're individuals practicing too is that the same way that I hurt my neck when I was moving in bed is often the transitions that challenge our bodies more than the finished pose. It's the moving from one place
Mhm.
to another where sometimes we're going at speed or sometimes we're not thinking about the journey, we're just thinking about the destination. So as individuals, thinking about how we move from place to place, and as teachers, trying to create a little bit more awareness about that or cueing around that can be really helpful. And then just balance, trying to create balanced sequences so the whole class isn't hamstring stretches and bird of paradise, but we do some hamstring strengthening as well. And we do some other movement planes and shapes and positions. And also thinking about balance uh, compared to our students' regular lives. Are you teaching a room of college athletes? Are you teaching a room of office workers? Are you teaching a room of retired adults? So choosing poses and transitions and sequences that will help create balance to the stuff they do in the rest of their life as well.
I love that. And I think
Mic
Mic
drop.
drop. I love that. And I think those are all really great as teachers. Again, we do the best we can. And then we
Mm,
have to let go of the rest. Remember that there's so much that's out of our hands. But I do think it's our duty, if you are a yoga teacher, especially full time, it's our duty to keep exploring and refining our art and doing our best to serve our communities. And that really just requires us being dedicated to learn and grow and being open to new ways of seeing things and experimenting to find what's best for you, for your students, for your classes. And so, with all of that, I think it's also just important to take a little nod to our language too as we
mm,
wrap this up and talk about how important it is to keep in mind that the body really is resilient and adaptable. It's made to adapt and there's so many brilliant features built into the system, all the systems to heal and repair and bring us back into balance. And the body's constantly at work doing that. Sometimes it needs a little push, and there's plenty of things we can do therapeutically. That is what we kind of spend our life doing at Yoga Medicine, is talking about those. But even our language, we talked about how language creates a visualization too. And so the simple things, and I'm always trying to rewrite this too, this what's often referred to now as this nociceptive language in the probably more in the physical therapy realm and the healthcare realm too. The nociceptors are the nerve endings that are communicating danger back to the brain. Some people will call them pain receptors, though pain is actually the brain's processing of that information. But I think
and
it's
there's a
really
whole episode, Resistant Pain with Marnie Hartman, that if you haven't listened to, you must, because it
ooh,
will totally change the way you think about pain as an experience and the way that you talk about it as well.
and
Carry
there's
on.
there's one coming up soon on fashion and pain. I don't know
Mm,
if it's out. No, I don't think it's out yet. It'll come out after this one, I think. but um but things like, instead of talking about having bad knees or protecting your back, like, how do I get rid of this fear-based language? If you do this, it will irritate your back. I hear so much of this in the yoga
mhm,
world, and it makes me kind of sad because then I think about all these people who are like, I've seen this at conferences and workshops a lot where teachers will get up there on their on the podium and talk about all these things that we do wrong and bad in yoga and how it hurts your back if you do this way or you move that way. And you can see people are excited, they're kind of angry because they've never learned it before, but they're also excited. But then they're also leaving feeling like they have fragile bodies, and our bodies aren't fragile. And of
mm,
course things are changing. If we're lucky enough to live long enough, things are going to change. But I think it's so important, rather than talking about not doing things because they'll irritate your back, do this to create more support for your back.
mm,
How do I get rid of that fear based language that makes me afraid of my body, afraid of my movement,
mm.
and empowers me instead to notice how I can now steer this conversation as a student to empower myself, to create more support.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think that
I
those
think
little
this
things
is
are
so
important.
important. It's huge. Language has such power, and we can create feelings without even intending to. Just by using the word safe, we invoke the thought of danger. So I'm not claiming to be perfect. I don't think we're asking anybody to be. But if we can create more of an attitude in ourselves as teachers that our students' bodies are capable of doing all kinds of things, especially with training, then hopefully that attitude starts to come through in the way that we teach and express ourselves and in the options that we give. And as I said earlier, this is a lot easier to do one on one than it is in a group, because one on one, there's so much room for in depth conversation and you can really dial into things. In my conversation with Marnie Hartman, She was even saying, pain is something to be curious about and investigate. And one on one, that's really possible to do. But in a group,
Mhm.
we probably have to take a slightly safer stance as teachers and just say, if you're in pain, come out, or give people space to avoid things that they're uncomfortable with.
Find what feels best to you. Find what works for
Yeah.
you.
And
Yeah.
even discomfort is
And maybe
interesting.
one of my favorites actually is, there's all these options, or find a comfortable position and visualize it and be as vivid as
Mm,
you can. It's honestly one of my favorite things to use therapeutically with people. So, if I'm working one on one with someone and they have an injury, I can give them some guidance around things to do or not do. But I can also then let them know, hey, if there's something you're not sure about, one of the best things you can do is just take a seat, a comfortable seat, visualize it, be very, very vivid about it. So if you're not comfortable doing sun salutes, visualizing it, listening to the teacher, talking them through it, and really feeling it in your body pain
mm,
free, because
mhm.
that helps to drive that neurologic information that helps my body now learn these pain free movements. So it's actually a very potent part of the recovery process, is not just the physical loading of
Yes.
the tissues. And pain is obviously a lot longer conversation, but now the neurologic information that changes those pain pathways as well. So
Mm,
that's a really potent one. Sometimes as a teacher,
I love it.
you can you can plant that as an option pretty succinctly, but them being really vivid about it is the key thing. Is like, you can do this, or find a comfortable seat and just visualize coming into this as vividly as you can.
Mm. I remember the first time I heard you do that in a class, and I remember having my mind blown, thinking that had never even occurred to me as an option. Because I do think as teachers, sometimes we feel the pressure to, if option A isn't helpful, then option B, or if option B is not helpful, option C, option D, option E. You can't go on and do that forever. So it's a really nice way to kind of round off that conversation of, this is always an option that has incredible power to it. And people take that option sometimes.
I like to also sometimes force everyone to do it. It's really an interesting thing too. Like if you're doing sun salutes or something like that, you lead a couple rounds and then you have everyone sit down and visualize it, and you talk them through it just as you would
Mm,
talk them through it if they were going into it, but they're all visualizing it. And again, I'm visualizing it pain free,
mm,
steady, strong, whatever visuals you want to
fluid,
plant,
easy. I
fluid.
love it.
Yeah, whatever
Mm,
themes you're trying to capture in your class potentially, and then have them do it again after that. And you just watch the class and you're like, wow, it really
yeah.
does change things. But it is helpful to have a focal point. So if maybe fluidity is your theme or what you're
Mm,
focusing on, or allowing the breath to move you or something, like it's helpful to have a little guidance behind it. But
I love that idea. Yeah. And I think just generally creating space for our students to be curious and investigative, to explore, as opposed to creating dogma in any way. This is the right way. This is the wrong way. This will damage. This will protect. Just creating more space in the way we teach, I think, makes our practices more interesting, more inviting, more helpful to the biggest range of people. And I think that's what we all want at the end of the day.
absolutely.
Bam.
I love this. Well, I'm gonna run through a few of our takeaways before
I
we
think that's a great.
sign
We've been
off.
talking for a while, so I think that's a really good idea.
I think one is this respect for the power and the potency of the practice is such a
Mm,
big one. One that I really love these days too is, and you actually had said this before. I don't know that you said it on the podcast, but this idea of being curious rather than determined. It was
mhm,
such a perfect way of saying it. Curiosity for me is such a big helpful word in a yoga practice, because it really dissipates all the judgment, all of the, like the story behind it. When I just get curious, the curiosity is so important. Being accountable is such a big one, and guiding our students or ourselves to be accountable and really embody the practice, to listen and notice.
mm,
As a teacher, to dissolve fear and help give people a really healthy respect for the potency of the practice. Again, that
Mm-hmm.
any potent medicine needs the proper dosing and the proper timing, that we don't necessarily always need to overthink it, but that each person needs to find what works for them at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Inspiring people along their journey as a yoga teacher, especially, so that might be to back off, that might be to push forward and stimulate regrowth, or to find a teacher to work one-on-one with. And then, when needed too, if there's injuries, finding a teacher who has some training to be able to support you and help you. Maybe checking out our Find a Teacher site, or pointing someone in that direction. And um, I think it always warrants just a reminder too that health is a journey. And, yoga is one part of it. There might be other layers to that journey. There might be other styles or other techniques, and as a yoga teacher, I'm always kind of looking at all the different tools in my tool belt and trying to find the one that might be most helpful for the person I'm working with. And then lastly, I just want to say too that it's easy to sometimes go through the motions of our practice. And I definitely think that there's some potency there, that it can also be helpful. But I think that we could also maximize that potency through our mindful attention, through education. It's why on the Yoga Medicine online platform, I love to have our little monthly doses, which are just short little lectures of things to help our students get the most out of their practices. And the podcast here too. That education, it's not that you need to know it all now. It's not that you need to be a yoga teacher, but as you learn these little tidbits, maybe that's in your yoga classes from your teacher, or in other realms like this podcast. But we can really maximize that potency through not only our mindful attention, but also as we start to understand things a little bit better, as we mentioned on this episode.
Mm-hmm.
So, gosh, so much great information, and we have so many resources. If you are a teacher or someone who's interested in learning more, I definitely recommend, if you're wanting to learn to work with injuries, checking out our if you're a teacher, our orthopedic teacher training. So we have one that goes really in depth on the hip and the biomechanics and therapeutics, as well as same thing for the shoulder and the spine.
And
If
what I
you're
love about those trainings is that we don't just talk about the most common injuries that you'll tend to see and come across, but we talk about general prevention and durability as well. So there's this
mm,
feeling of it applying to all of us and all of our students, injured or not.
the full spectrum, which is really what I
Mm-hmm.
believe therapeutic yoga is yoga that is really aimed at the individual. If you're a student who's not injured, you can check out our Yoga Medicine online platform. We're always planting little seeds in our classes, as well as the monthly dose. Really, our focus is to help people feel great with their yoga
Mm.
practice and get the most out of it. And if you're a student who's injured looking for more resources, again, check out our Find a Teacher page on yogamedicine.com, and you can find someone either virtually, one of our therapeutic specialists maybe, or someone near you if you want someone in person. So we've got tons of resources. As always, you can poke around on the website or on social media, but hopefully lots of stuff for you there to learn and support you wherever you're at. And I hope this has been helpful. Any last comments from you, Rachel? Anything last?
No, I think that the one takeaway that I would love people to leave with is that bodies are strong and trainable and adaptable. And there's a real beauty to using our practice to honor them wherever they're at in health or in healing.
I love that. That was perfect. Your body is brilliant. It's
Mm-hmm.
always adapting. Awesome. Well, thank you, Rachel. As always, some great discussions.
Thank
And
you.
I look forward to seeing everyone again next time. Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you like the show, please be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com, or check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine. You can also email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being a part of our Yoga Medicine community. We look forward to seeing you again. The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.